there's at least my feeling, people talking about sin and folks sinning and stuff. Everybody has their own notion of what it is. For me, sin is simply making a mistake. And what you do is you correct the mistake. You see? That's what you do. You make a mistake, you say, I made one. Oversight. And I've been, I try to stay open up at the top. When somebody says you missed something, you go back and fix it. So I missed something when I was starting my talking about students that I worked with. And what you heard is the word mentor. And what I forgot, reminded, everybody has a mentor. Sometimes they don't know it, and sometimes they know it and forget it. I got to Tuskegee because Walter Bowie, anybody around Tuskegee know Walter Bowie was my mentor. Yeah. And he told me before I even knew it that you come to Tuskegee sooner or later, so prepare to come. Before even that time, when I was first starting dental school at M.P.H, right across the street was a wonderful university called Fisk University. And I was a student of the 60s, and for those of you who were around there, you know, that was Black Power movement, and we would tear up everything. And I went to a predominantly white institution, so I had no problem with trying to tear it up. but when I got to M.P.H, professor who was not at M.P.H, was at Fisk, told me, you can't tear this up. This belongs to us. So change your strategy. And I was a dental student, and I would go over to Fisk to a professor, Dr. Chike Onwachi, who I used to sit and just listen to him, not talking about dentistry or science, talking about the world, and really my whole consciousness about who I was able to really grow. Because I was at San Francisco State as a student, that was absolutely wild. I didn't know how to contextualize that. So Professor Onwachi became my mentor. They didn't pay him, he wasn't at M.P.H. He was at Fisk, but I would go and talk to him about stuff. That's what, you know what, forgive me, he's here, but forgive me. Some folk talking about, as Professor Kanjufu said, that you have to grow up in a two-parent family to be okay. But then all the folks I knew, black men, did not grow up in two-parent families, including me. So there was something uncomfortable about that. So, but I didn't have my father around, so I wasn't looking for a mentor, but you know one when you see one. Right. What they say, when the student is ready, the professor will appear. I was ready, and Professor Onwachi appeared. So he left, and I went on my way. And when I finished graduate school, I decided to go to Nigeria to teach and to learn. And when I got to Nigeria, guess who was already there? Professor Onwachi, already there. And as I wandered around the University of Lagos Medical School, I bumped into a young woman who was a medical student, who I knew as kind of like a little kid, who was like my little sister. And she was there. And so I left Lagos and came back to the U.S. And lo and behold, she showed up again as a medical doctor, pediatric physician, M.P.H student at the CDC, Chuchu Onwachi Sanders. And that's that woman back there. So her father mentored me, and he told me, he said, Rueben, take care of my daughter. That's what he told me. And that's been how many years ago? Too many to count. But that's said, that's my mentee. And what she has done is mentored students all over the world. Because, you know, mentors are very personal kinds of people, and you just can't be a mentor unless somebody accepts you as a mentee. And I used to tell the young women all the time, there's some things I can't talk to you about because I don't know nothing about. I don't know nothing about some of the things that you want to know about. So I referred them to Chuchu, and she would tell them and then tell me what to say. So I want to recognize her as her father as my mentor and her as my mentee. And that's the one thing I have to say. The other thing I have to say before we get started, Dr.PH, So I told we wouldn't start without you. In 2015, I think I shared with you, we engaged in a relationship with the Centers for Disease Control because we wanted to honor Booker T. Washington, President Booker T. Washington. And for those of you who don't know, that genius of a man looked at the health of black people and found that it was horrible. And what he said is the same things that we're suffering for then, he said in 1915, we're suffering from now. Booker T. And what he said, not only are we going to have a conference at Tuskegee and talk about that every year, we're going to start something called Negro Health. And now it's evolved. So Booker T. Washington started Negro Health Month. The federal government called it Minority Health Month now, but we reminded them it started here at Tuskegee with Booker T. And so we held a forum at CDC, and we invited folks from around the country to talk about African black health. And Dr. Anwachi Saunders was one of the speakers. And equally as important, we said that we had another colleague who was organizing and managing the student posters. We said young students need to publish, need to present, and so he managed that whole effort with students presenting papers, and some of them actually published them. And we asked the authors to publish their work. And so Dr. Anwachi Saunders partnered with Dr. Gerby to publish an article in the journal, our journal, at Tuskegee, peer-reviewed journal, about that week. And so I wanted to recognize him for his wonderful work. Where's Dr. Gerby? Okay, well, when he comes back, when he steps in the door, whatever we're doing, just stop and start clapping, because let me tell you why. He deserves one of these coins. He deserves one of these coins. So I'm gonna give it to him, but whatever we're doing, when he steps in, just stop and start clapping. Okay? And if I'm talking, I'm gonna stop and start clapping, because he deserves one of these PPW's commemorative coins. So that's my story before we get started. How's everybody? Do you feel the cool breeze? Yeah. It's nice, it does. Yeah. Well, why don't you sing? When it's hot, you complain. When it's nice, you say nothing. You should be whispering this. You should be whispering cool breeze. Just cool breeze. You're gonna die. This is, I'm having, at the end of each day, we have evaluations. But when we're doing these kinds of things, we have impromptu and formal evaluations. We ask what we do right, what can we do better? And we've had some very good, nice statements. But we don't just want a nice statement. If something is a little off in your mind, it's let us know. Probably something we could work with. Because we always want to do better. That's our goal. Because the goal is greatness, and to be nothing short of that. But I love hearing things like, I'm getting something here that I wouldn't have gotten elsewhere. I just heard that, so I really want you, that we really appreciate that, because it took a lot of time to pull this all together. So now we're moving into the last presentation of the day, last two presentations. And this one is special. This one is special, because I'm looking forward to ask questions this one. Because this is Dr. Warren he said, I'm not your boss, I'm your supervisor. That's what you said, right? Yeah, boss sounds too much like yes, I'm boss, you know. you gotta harken back to something we would prefer to forget, or at least to move on from. Never forget it, but move on from it. But nevertheless, Dr. Warren will be presenting. So, look forward to that. The young lady who's going to be presenting moderating today, I met her in this auditorium, in this safe space, when I first came to Tuskegee in October of last year. When I first came to this position of Tuskegee October of last year. And she was the first student to step up to the plate and said, I would like to do more. But people say things.
And so I wanted to watch and see. And Dr. Warren gave me a little elbow. I think she means it. And she has meant it. And I had an opportunity and a blessing and an honor to write another letter of recommendation for her at the end of the year. And it was one of those things that she said is a very slim chance that I will get it. Very, very slim chance. She got it. So for that, we are extremely excited. She has been chosen to be the president, incoming president for 2018-2019 for the Bioethics Honors Program. That means that after we finish PHEI, this session, we sit down and start planning for the entire next year's session for the Bioethics Honors Program. We want this to be the kind of things that people actually send their children to be a part, because we wanted to capitalize on what it means to be at Tuskegee, what it means to be at the National Bioethics Center, and what it means to represent those men and women who gave themselves in a way that it was stolen from them a few years ago. Now, our moderator for today is Ms. Caleb Washington.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Today's session, we will be hearing from the Tuskegee's Dr. Warren, and we'll be hearing from Dr.PH, Risling-DeJong. Starting with our presenter, Dr. Warren. He is currently the director of the National Center for Bioethics and Research in Healthcare and the professor of bioethics at Tuskegee University in Tuskegee, Alabama. He also serves as director and adjunct professor of the Institute of Faith Health Leadership and adjunct professor of public health medicine ethics at the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta, Georgia. From 1988 to 1997, Dr. Warren served as Associate Director for Minority Health at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC. From 1997 to 2004, he was Associate Director of Urban Affairs at the Agency of Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. From 2005 to 2007, Dr. Warren served part-time as the Director of Infrastructure Development for the National Center of Minority Health and Health Disparities at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda. I was going to get it wrong. From 2004 to 2009, he was on leave from the National Center for Environmental Health, CDC, in Atlanta, where he served as Associate Director for Environmental Justice. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Warren.
I remember when Dr. Gerby kept saying this. I was asked to present because a dear friend and colleague, Dr. David Baines, could not. David Baines has been with us for several years, Native American by race and ethnicity, physician, primary care physician, and has a story. He presented on 2 occasions in years past, and last year he was to come, couldn't come. He had some medical challenges, and this year I told him whenever you're ready, you can come. So he was on tap to come this year, but could not. But I do want you to learn a little bit about who Dr. Baines is. Dr. Hodge, will you come make this thing happen? Just a little bit about his story. You need to know David Baines.
When I was young, when I was younger and had legs to do it, I just pushed myself and would hike all over like other hunters. As I got less and less mobile, I started thinking like, gosh, how am I gonna do this? And that's when I really started remembering the teachings when I was a little kid about how the animals said they would give themselves to us when we needed them. I had no concept growing up on the reservation of doing anything like going to college. Nobody expected anything of us, so we didn't expect anything of us either. I tried to join the Marines in 1972, and they weren't hiring. I took a job for a tribal sawmill. Several months in, working there, the main compressor blew up. I got blasted 63 feet. Should have killed me. Just the legs got crushed. They were like mush. They eventually did surgery, and I went down to Arizona to stay with my mom because I needed somebody to care for me. She was going part-time to community college. So went into the career office and took one of those tests that ask you if you'd rather play basketball or read a book. And the first one was truck driver, and then 7 of the 9 were all in medicine. I just decided to might as well go for the top. I always wish the Creator had a little better way of getting me in that direction, but probably is the only way. I'm D.D.S. I'm Simpson and Tlingit from Southeast Alaska. I was the first doctor from both those tribes on both sides of the Canadian and Alaska borders. The 32 years I worked as a physician, I probably delivered over 1,000 babies, did my own C-sections for many years when we were in rural places. Picked up gallbladders and sent fractures. Got to help people die with dignity. It was a tremendous responsibility, but also a great honor. We're taught as young people, like first we find what our gifts are and then we find our path. But when we're on our path, part of our job there is passing on the knowledge to the coming generations. And it wasn't too many years ago that I realized looking around that almost all the people that were younger than me, I had mentored in some way, whether it had been speaking at a pre-admissions workshop, helping them out by email or texting with an issue, whether it had been talking about my experiences and how I overcame them as a young physician, or just dancing as a headman dancer at the powwow. When I was in Dutch Harbor, I walked into this room and here was this guy that I took care of on the Coeur d'Alene reservation a long time. And George, what are you doing here? And he goes, Dr. Baines, what are you doing here? And he got bad bronchitis because they were working in horrible conditions, and I got his bronchitis treated. And he stopped me from opening the door and he goes, Dr. Baines, I've always wanted to say this. The day you walked onto our reservation, there was a paradigm shift in what our children thought they could do with their lives. You know, we have 3 doctors in our tribe now, and it's because of you. And I want to thank you.
That's Dr. Baines. So every year he would get an invitation here, whether he shows up or not. This Washington is talking me, so start my 30 minutes now. Yeah, I gave Dr. Baines some of my time, but I need it back. Ethics and well-being, age 45 to 64, is a topic that is positive, affirming, and empowering. The word should excite anyone who is interested in either topic. However, when one attempts to operationalize either term in the context of life stages, the discussion is a difficult one to discern. How do you talk about 45 to 64 if you're younger, or 45 to 64 if you're older? Equally as important, what is ethics and what is being? And what is the importance of 45 to 64? The definition that one chooses will for either term will drive your response, whether it's correct or incorrect, right or wrong. There's no such thing when you're talking about what you believe. However, the definitions that you choose must be contextualized such that the topics are clear and readily discernible. For the purpose of this presentation, ethics is defined as a set of rules, principles, values, and ideas of a particular set of people, The systematic study of morals, concepts, and theories, typically in departments of philosophy. We separate morals from ethics in that morals refer to how one treats other people, and ethics refers to how one wishes to be treated. Others may differ on those definitions, but that's what we talk about here at Tuskegee. The terms are not synonymous from our perspective. The various spheres of ethics allow further clarification about different ethics in different domains, such as bioethics, public health ethics, research ethics, virtue ethics, care ethics, communication ethics, just to name a few. There are even different types of religious ethics, even though religion and ethics are not the same. You know that some believers can be unethical, and some non-believers can be very ethical. Religion and ethics are not the same. While there are often debates about the absolute right and wrong of things and what is right to do, it is a little easier to talk about what's not right to do, though that's difficult at times. For example, thou shalt not kill is straightforward, and I suspect most of you would agree. However, the killing as an act of self-defense is legally acceptable, but it's unethical maybe. If somebody messed with one of my children, they're in trouble. Just war theory is a doctrine also referred to as a tradition of military ethics studied by theologians, ethicists, policymakers, and military leaders. The purpose of the doctrine is to ensure war is morally justifiable, though through a series of criteria, all which must be met for war to be considered just war. In my view, communities have the right and obligation to define what is ethical within the context of their lived experiences and life circumstances. Like, we don't talk about the Tuskegee syphilis study here. We don't talk about that here. That's a cultural norm in Tuskegee and Macon County. However, right is not an absolute either. And there's always tension between what is good for the individual and what is good for the group, public health students. Well-being is another difficult term It is used in various definitions of health. We always say, what is health? And we start talking about well-being. For example, well-being integrates mental health, that's the mind, and physical health, that's the body, resulting in a more holistic approach to disease prevention and health promotion, they say. Well-being, some say, is a valid population outcome measured beyond morbidity and mortality and economic status that tells us how people perceive themselves to be. I'm feeling okay is one way of well-being. Well-being is an outcome that is meaningful to the public. Advances in psychology, neuroscience, measures of theory suggest that well-being can be measured with some degree of accuracy. How are you feeling? These notions of well-being are included in most definitions of health. The most commonly used definition is the one used by the World Health Organization as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not just the absence of disease. WHO's definition of health is clearly defined and universally accepted in most places as a broadened definition of health. But here, we think that that definition is not good enough. In that regard, health may be described as a dynamic relationship, a synergistic interplay between the physical, social, psychological, and spiritual elements that create the well-being between individuals and groups in their physical and social environment. That description, that definition of health includes several important elements. A dynamic interchange. You can be healthy one minute and get some bad news the next minute, and you're not healthy anymore. It's happened to me. The group. It's hard to be healthy by yourself. And when you're not feeling well, what? You got to tell somebody. That's right. So you can't be healthy, in my view, by yourself. The physical and social environment. We talk about the physical environment where we work, play, and live, and some of us where we worship. The social environment, quite the same. The issues with this violence that's killing the world is an issue of the social environment. While these constructs in health are difficult to understand, even more difficult to assure, the right to be healthy is a growing concern in most parts of the world. And even in this country, we're learning slow, but I think we're learning. This is the only industrialized country in the world that does not have universal health insurance, universal health care. That to me is absolutely unethical. The challenge is to scientifically determine the association between health and health care and translate the elements of health into measurable outcomes. Just because you have health care does not mean that you're healthy. The quickest way to get out of a doctor's office, physician, dentists, and others, is to not have anything wrong. When I was practicing, and I'm a dentist, if there was nothing wrong, I said, go away and come back in a year. I'm going to look for something.
Get out, yeah.
That happens too often, but every time it happens, we stop and we go out. We've got some thoughts on how to clear that up as well. And where I was going with some authority, and I say it with tongue-in-cheek, was I'm past 65, so I have the benefit of looking back. And you know, our symbol at the Bible Center is the Sankofa bird, looking back to move forward. You cannot benefit in the future unless you understand what went on in the past. So I'm looking back in this section. I was talking about the importance of life stages ages 46 to 65. It was selected because at an age range as this, well-being is critically important. During this life stage, the cumulative challenges to one's well-being, such as chronic disease, and I won't say all of us have some of us have some, physical and mental disabilities, and the consequence of adverse environmental exposure began to manifest. This is the time in our lives where all those things that we've been walking around and breathing and eating and not doing, we tend to manifest at this period in our lives. In earlier years, one's physical and mental development is at its anatomical and physiological peak. You know, when you say, when I was 20, when I was 25, I could do that. And what I'm suggesting, you still can, just do it slower. Do it more intentionally. And you know, the individuals, when we were young folk, we were able to withstand and recover. It's not so much about what happens to you, it's how fast can you recover from most health threats. In fact, the human body is extraordinarily able to recover from many population-based health threats. We're breathing bad air. We're drinking bad water. We're growing good food in bad soil. There's something wrong with that. How can Tuskegee be a food desert? How can you be in Tuskegee and not get fresh vegetables and fresh fruit? Something's wrong with that. And when I say wrong, I'm talking ethics. Amen. Something's wrong with that. And you don't need 1 degree to talk ethics. You don't need 1 degree to talk ethics. As impressive as the accomplishments in cloning, in organ transplantation, in neuroscience, and epigenetics, as impressive as they may be, the scientific genius that the research enterprise has encompassed has yet to replicate the human body. Has yet to replicate the human body. Some scientists from an institution who remain unnamed called us about, wanted to talk to us about xenotransplantation. Anybody know what that is? Xenotransplantation. Tell us what it is, Doctor. Transplanting from pigs. They wanted to talk to us about xenotransplantation, and we had to pause. They wanted to come to Tuskegee and talk to us about it. He said, no, we'll come to you if you want to talk about it. You're not going to come here and then turn around and say, you've been in Tuskegee and we agreed with you. So no, you're not coming up in here. We will come to you, and they have yet to invite us. And as we talked about it in staff meeting, you're my witness, folks said, I have somebody in my church that had a vein that was from a pig. So things are happening that we must know about. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm saying it's a conversation that we must have. And you're not going to have it here and then tell somebody you had it here. It's happened to us before. It ain't going to happen again. Right. The age range 46 to 65 is a period when individuals have physically, mentally, and maybe spiritually met spiritual challenges that may have not been recognized, but now they're realized. Some go through what's called midlife crisis. A midlife crisis. On the other hand, this life stage, many people have had time to prepare to contribute those things to those people that they care about. The important things you want to give to your family, to your children, to your grandchildren, to community, and to the nation. This is the time, 46 to 65, you're at your best. So let anybody convince you that you're at your worst. They're often in positions to influence personal well-being and that of groups and communities, the nation, and even the world. During this life stage, many of the people are in positions of influence. They can influence public policy that impacts on our communities. This is the time that we ought to be at our best. In recent years, life expectancy and the quality of life for most people has improved. The country is getting better. The country is getting greater. Yet many of the age groups that are physically and mentally healthier don't look like us. They're not enjoying the best time in their life. The phrase 70 is the new 50 doesn't fit for a lot of us. 70 is the new 50. But it speaks to the importance of this life stage. However, while the morbidity and mortality throughout the United States has improved, health inequities, defined as racial and ethnic health disparities, continue, particularly for African Americans. In many instances, they've worsened. Things are not getting better for everybody. They're getting better for some, but not everybody. That's equity. That's equity. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read this passage about unhealthy inequity. I'm going to bypass that. You know about it. You're living it. It's simply to say every statistic has a name. And many of those names are folk we know. So I always pause when I see the statistics, except whenever they have them, I know that most likely people of color, with the exception of a few instances, are at the bottom of the line. So I'm not going to read that because that gets boring. That gets depressing. In another life, I used to go around with slides and talk about health disparities, and I have a list of all racial and ethnic populations. And every time I was being politically astute, I'd have black represented black people, yellow represented Asians, brown represented Hispanics and Latinos. That was good. And white represented the white population. But every time the slide with the sickest people was black. Every time. Folk 9, black. I stopped them slides. Because I'd be depressed. I wasn't going to depress myself. So I stopped them slides. I didn't talk about that anymore. I shifted a paradigm. That's when I went to seminary. So I need to learn something new. A new way of looking at old things. I need to learn how to hold on. Because today they don't teach you. All those schools I went, they didn't teach me how to hold on. I learned how to hold on in Sunday school. I learned how to hold on in Sunday school. But let's talk about public health ethics as a framework, which has three basic constructs. Community engagement, how you engage with communities in which you care about. Not only ask them show them what they need, but ask them what they want. Ask folks what they want. That's community engagement. I'm not saying we're going to agree or we're going to do it, but we need to hear it. What do you think? You know more about you than I do. I need to listen before I start talking. Another construct of public health ethics is beneficence. In the traditional bioethics, they talk about benevolence, the intention to do good. I'm not concerned about your intentions. Beneficence is doing good, and ought to be able to measure it. Don't tell me what you want to do, show me what you've done. That's beneficence. And social justice, I'm concerned about us. Yes, you are important, but you are no more important than us, than I am. So I'm concerned about the us. That's social justice. To us at the center, the framework is important. Scientific jargon reads, to prevent preventable sickness, illness, unnecessary and premature death, and to promote health among people of color, federal, state, and local policymakers must authentically engage vulnerable populations in order to develop policies and programs to ensure we meet their needs. That's a long description, but it includes all the elements of social justice, all the elements of public health ethics. As previously stated, health is a dynamic relationship. You've heard it, so I won't repeat it. The literature continues to document that ethnic and racial populations continue to suffer unnecessary, preventable health disparities. Unnecessary, preventable health disparities. That's the framework of our conversation. This is unnecessary. This is preventable. Why is it happening? Why is it happening? Why do I say it's preventable? Because if you look at the data on non-Hispanic whites, and then look at the data on non-Hispanic black, or non-Hispanic or Hispanics, the gap is what we know and don't do. What we know and don't do. And knowing and not doing is unethical. It's unethical. I'm going to skip things you already know, but I want to catch up on my time. Let me get to the essence of my conversation. We talk about illness, disease, and sickness. Well, what is illness? What is sickness? What is disease? Are they the same? In a book entitled Health as Liberation, Medicine, Theology, and the Quest for Justice, Campbell writes that illness is used to describe specific adverse health conditions. Hear that? Specific adverse health conditions. Illness is a subjective experience of the individual, the awareness of ill health. The subjective experience of an individual, the awareness of ill health. Sickness is the ascription of ill health to a person by others. An ascription that they may not be aware of in the absence of disease. Somebody with a mental health condition, there ain't no disease you can see, but something's wrong. Something is wrong. Some disease is the medical or scientific endorsement of the social role of sickness. Now I want you to hear this. Sounds complicated, but it's really simple. Disease is the medical or scientific endorsement of the social role of sickness. Let me give you an example. In a May 1851 article entitled Disease and Physical Peculiarities of the Negro Race, published in the New Orleans Medical and Surgical Journal, Samuel Cartwright, M.D., wrote about diseases specific to black folk. He described drapetomania. Drapetomania. The disease of running away from slavery. In the journal now, the scientific journal, running away from slavery. He also described disease, dysesthesia, and the opus, a hertitude of mind and aptitude sensibility known as rascality. Many of y'all call your children rascals. That's what he's talking about. A sickness were the enslaved men and women ill because they sought freedom from enslavement, or were the oppressors who published an outstanding article in the first edition of our journal when we interacted with the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, when we celebrated honoring 100 years of Booker T. Washington's death and really his life. And for that, he deserves one of these coins. You see, things happen. a believer. You can't predict or expect. Good begets good. As I was saying, were the enslaved men and women ill because they sought freedom from enslavement and oppression? Or were their oppressors, the white slave masters and the white physicians, mentally ill for the barbaric treatment of other human beings? You decide. You decide. Another ethical problematic. You decide. Well, enough about illness, sickness, disease, enough about suffering, except that you should know that this country spends more money on health care than any other country in the world. And our statistics are embarrassingly poor, to the point where you don't want to go anywhere internationally and repeat them. More money, less positive outcomes. This may not be the healthiest place in the world to live. May be the sickest place, but not the healthiest place to live. Think about it. I'm going to go on so we can go on. My moderator gave me 5 minutes, and I caused my personal privilege because of all that stuff. I blame it on all that stuff. Let me go on. Enough about getting old associated with getting sick. Be clear. Age and sickness are not synonymous. Don't expect less of me because I'm getting older. Age and sick are not synonymous. Don't think just because you're getting older, you're supposed to be sick. You're not supposed to be sick. Don't accept a sick role that you don't deserve. Thoughts become things. You act sick, folks going to treat you like you're sick, and you're going to feel sick, and you're going to be sick. Trust me. I know. Forgive me. My daughter keeps buying me these young men's shoes. I want some old men's shoes. She don't have to wear them. You don't look like no old men's shoes. So I'm walking around I got young men's shoes on, there's old men's body. Sickness and illness are not synonymous with age. Don't get it twisted. Let me talk to you about something you heard earlier, but I want to build on it, then I'm going to sit down. I want to focus the rest of my attention on optimal health and health promotion, principles to enhance the quality of life for people regardless, age 46 to 65. During that life stage, we are in our prime. We're in our prime. I believe that you're on your way to your prime. Okay? On your way to your prime. Is your cup half empty? Is your cup half full? It's up to you. It's up to you. You may not be at your peak, but you're all right. The author of the concept of optimal health, John Chazelle, you heard about it from Dr. M.H. Saunders, an African-American physician who mentored me for more than 10 years before he made his transition in 2004. He was a M.P.H graduate, I always want to say that. He finished M.P.H, where I finished. He taught me and many others about optimal health. He wrote a book called Pyramids of Power, an ancient African-centered approach to optimal health. He told me that defining health has been an elusive challenge for people engaged in research, education, and community engagement related to health promotion. So y'all don't know what I'm talking about. He dismissed the WHO definition of health. That's why I could do it comfortably. I wasn't the first to say it ain't enough. He said it. And I always say he said it. He tells you that it's more than that. Chazelle says optimal health is your greatest state of aliveness. Your greatest state of aliveness. He outlines 5 domains: optimal physical, optimal emotional, optimal socioeconomic, optimal intellectual, optimal spiritual health. He defined those things. No, he described those things. He left it to us to define them. And we're on the way to doing that. I'm not going to read them because you can get them. Let me conclude. Let me conclude. Dr. Giselle outlined 5 areas of optimal health. I've given them to you. I'm not going to find them. But I have 5 health promotion principles that I want to share with you at the individual level. Giselle's is philosophical, it's pragmatic, it's big. Mine are specific for you to do. Eat the right food. Come on. Taking care of your body. Y'all know it. Getting along with others. Respecting and protecting the environment. Believing in a divine order to the universe. Now, which one of those requires you to go to the doctor? I'm not saying don't go. I'm just saying don't stay. Know what you're going for. When you get it and get out of there. Everybody needs a good primary care physician and a good primary care dentist. Go, but don't stay. I was going to talk about M.P.H, the father of medicine, the Egyptian father, but I don't have time. That's okay. I was also going to talk about a European scholar who talked about rest, relaxation, and getting along with other folk. But I don't have time. But I simply say they sound like Booker T. Washington to me. They sound like Booker T. Washington to me. Let me really conclude by simply saying public health ethics emphasizes the ethical problematic, that's the issue, related to the interests and health of groups. I cannot be healthy without you. So it's important to me to keep you healthy. So I'm not just doing it for you, I'm doing it for me. I cannot be healthy without you. King said it in a way that I want to repeat, because everybody can talk about Martin Luther King. He says, I can't be the best I can be until you are the best that you can be. That's an investment in you. That's an investment in the young folks that we're trying to do. Let me say it differently. The most important part of your human being is being. Not being a doctor, not being a lawyer, not having a lot of money, just being. Being. Being is enough. So I've invited you to Tuskegee, to this conference, to enjoy yourself and just be who you be. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Dr. Warren. As our respondent to this topic, we will have Dr. Ms. Rueben Risling-DeJong, M.H, Ph.D. She is a member of the Hoopa Valley Tribe in Northern California. She comes from a long line of tribal family members serving as regalia makers, dance leaders, medicine men, women, traditional educators, tribal leaders, and leaders for American Indian sovereignty issues. Rueben currently serves as full-time faculty at the University of South Alabama Physician Assistant Studies. She maintains clinical practices in family medicine. She has a strong history of working with underserved populations and is dedicated to improving access to care by helping to eliminate barriers. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Risling.
Well, thank you. I do have a PowerPoint, Dr. Warren. And so how do we make, does it need a studio? Like, that's not what I can do. we need to switch it to a different mode from video. That's not what we want.
What do students come on and do? We're going to do it, come show us. Don't
Where it's
tell us, show us. Is that okay? Can y'all see it okay?
Okay, well, thank you so much. And Dr. Warren, that was a really beautiful, enlightening, educational talk. And hopefully I can do some justice following up with some follow-up points to that talk. And, okay, so will this advance my slides? Okay. And what I wanted to do is really first talk about a concept that's big to me. It's a very broad concept called worldview. And worldview is very important to consider, I believe, because it has a lot to do with ethics and well-being. It not only it's not just about your individual worldview, but it's also about population worldview. It's not just about our present, but we can look at our past and consider worldview that brought us to our present and where we're going with it in the future. And so as we conclude this session, I would like to ask that we all here think about, well, first let me define worldview, just give you the dictionary definition of worldview. It's a person's worldview is the way they see and understand the world, especially regarding issues such as politics, philosophy, and religion. So it's basically your belief system. So I would like to ask you to consider, what is your worldview? What do you accept? What don't you accept? How does it impact the way you view aging, the way you view disparities, ethics, morality, health, and well-being? How does this affect how you live through your experiences? How does this impact the way we relate to one another? And really important to me is how do we ascribe value to one another based on worldview? So worldview, just to give an example of just how impactful worldview is, we'll go back and look at the clash of worldviews, two worldviews from history, her story, the past, and really look at time of contact, those two worldviews that came in and clashed. And time of contact meaning when the settlers or the colonizers came to this country, and they're bringing their worldview and meeting the indigenous people of this country worldview as well. So just a little background to show the two differences of, and it's very general, I'm speaking in very general terms about the two different worldviews that came into contact with each other. There was the Euro-Christian worldview, which had in it, it's wrapped in it its concept of time as well, seeing time on in a linear process, like an arrow going forward. So the value system was one based on progress. So as you continue to go forward in time, you continue, the value was on how do you get more abundance, how do you prosper more. The value was on the religious view was one that was man was disassociated with nature. So man was considered high on the hierarchy in terms of plants and animals that existed. Things were pretty rigid in terms of this is what you must do. There was a relationship between man, the sinner, and God, and his or her God. and a lot of, if you think about the Quaker and Puritans, that type of religious view that came here, things were very, very rigid. You can think about how a lot of expression wasn't considered godly in terms of expression. I mean, laughing and dancing and celebrating, things were a little bit more rigid, and people should behave in a more conservative type of manner. And so this is what was understood at that time to be pious and to be that good human being. And then contrast that to the indigenous belief system here, a worldview where you had time was looked upon as cyclical in nature. So you didn't have that. There wasn't just any such thing as moving forward, because the time was very predictable. It followed seasons. So the value was not on getting more and abundance, having more or whatnot. It was about being able to live in harmony with this cyclical type of environment. It was about harmony and balance. And so, yes, there were still wars and people fought on both sides in both communities, but where wars were fought, the difference with the indigenous was peoples were that wars were not fought to conquer and to get more and to climb higher. It was wars were fought just like wars are fought today, but the value then was restoring harmony and balance. And the main thing that most American Indians looked at during that time was, if they went to battle, what was that price going to be afterwards in terms of trying to restore harmony back into place again. So two completely different value systems at the time of contact. And I have a few journal articles that really kind of expressed this clash in terms of how the dominant culture came and viewed the American Indians. And these are the ones. This is first contact with California Indians. So I have here in 1786, Journal of a French explorer, La Perouse, visiting the Monterey Mission in California. And this is what he said. He said, he's describing what he saw. He said, everything brought to our recollection a plantation at San Domingo or any other West Indian island. We observed with concern that the resemblance is so perfect that we might have seen both men and women in irons and others in the stocks. Lastly, the noise of the whip might have struck our ears, this punishment also being administered, though with little severity. The day consists in general of 7 hours labor and 2 hours prayer. Corporal punishment is inflicted on the Indians of both sexes who neglect the exercises of piety and many sins which in Europe are left to divine justice, are here punished by irons in the stocks. The missionaries, persuaded from their prejudices and perhaps from their experience that the reason of these men is scarcely ever developed, consider this a just motive for treating them like children. And then another example, 1878, William Haley wrote, the California Indian was one of the most degraded of God's creatures. He was without knowledge, religion, or morals, even in their most elementary forms. He lived without labor and enjoyed all the ease and pleasure he could. Physically, he was not prepossessing, although having considerable endurance and strength. His skin was nearly as dark as that of the Negro, and his hair as coarse as that of a horse, while his features were repulsive. To gratify his appetite and satiate his lust were his only ambition. He was too cowardly to be warlike and did not possess that spirit of independence which is commonly supposed to be the principal attribute of his race. In so genial a climate as ours, nature easily provided for all his wants. The best part of his time was spent dancing and sleeping. So this is just an example of how the perspective of one worldview to another, and you can kind of see, I hope you can kind of see the misinterpretations that were possibly going on as the one more dominant world that came to be the more dominant worldview looked at the other worldview and and try to mold whatever was happening there to interpret it in the ways that it would interpret its own worldview. And so to me, this really shows, is evidence for where the birthplace of where the subjugation and discrimination for the indigenous people came from, is from these very early contacts and the clash of these two worldviews. So I think it's really important for us to kind of consider what our worldviews are, and I believe that this is still has a lot, is significant for the way that for the health disparity that we see even today. And I still think this goes back to this very early contact and this type of thought. And I feel like it has a big part to do with the inequality and health disparity and inequality in health access. And then I wanted to bring up another issue that I think is really relevant, and that is environment. So what is the impact of environment in terms of health and well-being? So this particular experiment, maybe some of you are already familiar with it. It's done in 1970. It's called the Rat Park experiment. So this really looked at environment as a determinant for addiction to substance morphine. So what happened in this experiment is that they took two populations of rats, and in one population they caged the rats. They were in isolation and had just the very bare minimums to survive, and gave them water and also water with morphine in it. And then in the other situation, controlled environment, they had this really beautiful, what they call rat park, which was like a paradise for rats. So here the rats could do everything. They could socialize, they had everything, they had little nesting areas and whatnot, but they also had the choice of two different types of water, regular water or the sugar water with morphine. And so what the experiment found was that the rats in the cage, they were not just partaking of the morphine water, but they were doing it very frequently, and they became addicted. Whereas in the rat park, there were some rats that did partake of the morphine water, but the majority of them did not, and there wasn't that addiction problem. It was not, there wasn't that state. And perhaps more interesting to me was that when they took the caged rats that were addicted to the morphine water and placed them into Rat Park, they started to wean themselves off, and they went through some withdrawals. And so this is, and again, this is just looking at the environment. What is the significance of environment in terms of our health and well-being and the ethical implications of this all? So environment is also, to me, is plays a huge part. And then lastly, I thought to turn our attention to the article that I gave out to you guys to be able to read or reference. And this was an interesting article to me because it really tried to look at well-being and define it, and it tried to take it apart and measure it and try to figure out how can we tell other measurables to see how well we are doing in terms of well-being. And one of the things that it talked about, first of all, it talked about well-being as being a pretty ancient philosophical concept dating back to Aristotle. And so the term for it is eudaimonia. And the definition here for well-being in these terms is that, number one, I think this is really important, is the first one is that it transcends happiness, feeling good, or satisfying appetite. So when we're talking about well-being, we're not just talking about happiness, we're talking about something more. And then also the state of activities of the soul that are in line with virtue, striving to achieve the best that is within us, and first, know yourself, and second, become what you are. So what the studies have found was that individuals who were able to successfully navigate through different adverse events in their life were usually the ones that came out with higher state of well-being. And so when you're thinking about adversity, this is having to do with and well-being, it's having to successfully negotiate through life's challenges, negotiate through transitions of adult life, and we're talking about the particular ages of 46 to 65, was it? And then also resiliency, which is the capacity to maintain or regain well-being in the face of adversity. So in blue here, I have just a little reminder about some of those more common types of adversarial situations and events that we are faced with, that we will need to be able to navigate successfully through. And here, I like this because here are 6 dimensions that were found in this study in terms of being able to measure a person's state of well-being. And these were interesting dimensions to me, and I can actually relate to them. They almost seem like, some studies to me seem like they seem so obvious. Why would you have to have a study to prove it? But here are the 6 dimensions. So the first one is autonomy, and high scores in autonomy are those who are self-determining and independent, able to resist social pressures, to think and act in certain ways. They regulate behavior from within and evaluate self by personal standards. And then there's the environmental mastery component to well-being, and high scores in this area have a sense of mastery and competence in managing the environment, controls complex array of external activities, makes effective use of surrounding opportunities, and able to choose or create content suitable to personal needs and values. And then there's a personal growth dimension, and high scores in personal growth have a feeling of continued development, sees self as growing and expanding, is open to new experience, has a sense of realizing his or her potential, sees improvement in self and behavior over time, is changing in ways that reflect more self-knowledge and effectiveness. And then positive relationships with others is the other dimension. Higher scores have warm, satisfying, trusting relationships with others, which Dr. Warren had brought up in his talk. Is concerned about the welfare of others, capable of strong empathy, affection, and intimacy, understands give and take of human relationships. And purpose in life is a big one. And those with high scores has goals in life and a sense of direction, feels there is meaning to present and past life, holds beliefs that give life purpose, has aims and objective for living. And the last one is self-acceptance. And self-acceptance possesses a positive attitude toward the self, acknowledges and accepts multitude aspects of self, including good and bad qualities, feels positive about past lives. So again, these were measures, and what I just gave you the definition of are the high scores in those areas. And this slide, there we go. Okay. So all I really wanted to show with this slide is I have the same exact information as I presented on that other slide that looked linear and rigid. And all I did was reformat and make a different picture of the same information in a more cyclical pattern, just to remind us to look at things from different perspectives, so the same type of picture from a different perspective, and then note how you might feel when you do look at that perspective. What are some of the emotions that come along with that? Does something look more easier or manageable in one format than another? Does one perspective look more, does it educate you more than another one does, or whatnot? So it really is the same information presented in a different way to just kind of remind us to look at things in a different perspective. And then lastly, adaptive human functioning. These areas here that I have up are really what I've already alluded to, and that what Dr. Warren has already alluded to. These are just the factors, and they're complex, actually, factors that we have to think about and we have to navigate through in terms of how we adapt and how we think about our experiences in terms of defining our own well-being, ethics, and well-being. And these are the social, bio, psycho, environmental areas, and also something called phenomenology. And phenomenology is the study of phenomena, appearances of things or things as they appear in our experience or the ways we experience things. Thus, the meaning things have in our experience. So what I would then ask all of us to do today is think about how our worldview then that we have currently might be shaping right now these aspects, these elements of our human existence. And do we accept it? Do we want to change it? What are we accepting, and how do we want it to look? And I believe that is it.
The first question.
Okay, I have first. Okay, so Dr. Warren, you were talking about how there's not this much social determinants in people today for like different races, but how are we going to improve on like public health ethics? And they said it's for everybody when we're constantly getting teared down from, they saying slavery is gone and violence, but it's not really when they say, but if you do a crime, you're supposed to be enslaved. Or how they have the Japanese internment camp that they had for other people and other races that affected. How are we going to push through and move forward as a community when every single time we get to that spot, we learn their game, we achieve their game, but they're going to come out and twist it on us so we don't achieve what they want?
I think what I heard you, this one, is it better? I think what I heard you ask is how do we continue to move forward when the things that we achieve ethically seem to be notwithstanding over time. In other words, we take 2 steps forward, 1 step forward and 2 steps backwards. I think first you have to, I tried to say in my comments, you have to decide your ethical framework. Decide on what you believe and what you don't believe. And you have to do that in concert with community. And that means you have to decide who is in your community and what defines community. And once you convince that what you believe is correct, then you have to push forward in spite of the odds. What's happened historically, it seems that we're moving forward and then moving backwards. We're moving forward and we move backwards, but not as fast. So we're taking 2 steps forward and maybe 1 step backwards. And I'm depending on your generation to continue to take 2 steps forward. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Question?
I have a question for Dr. Warren, but another question she best to be asked. In terms of public health ethics and ethics in general, what was your perception of Charlottesville? And this goes on with Beyond's question. How was your perspective of Charlottesville, given what you've seen historically, when there were so many white people or non-black people who were on the side against the neo-Nazis? Does that speak to progress in any way to you?
For me, it talks about the framing of community. You know, and community is broader than the notion of one's race, one's ethnicity, one's gender, or one's sex. Broader than where you geographically live. The community is around common experiences and common beliefs. I'm convinced that the more we see, the broader our perspective comes. And it's more difficult, I said in my comments, to determine what's right than it is to determine what's wrong. It became quite obvious to anybody that would be honest enough to admit it, that what was going on in Charlottesville was wrong. But we may not have known the right thing to do, but we knew that was wrong. So in times such as these, the wrongness going on makes clearer the right that needs to go on. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did.
So I have one question to you, Dr.PH, regarding the rat theory, rat research. So, like you mentioned about rat theory research, that rat in cage and dead garden between two. So, like you said, like the rat who were in the cage wean off easily from the morphine, then you put them in the rat garden, right? So, what happened to them who was already in the rat garden and you put them in the rat cage? How they behave later.
Yes, so I'm not actually sure about that part of the, I don't know if they actually did that in that experience. Does anybody know more about that experiment? Because there's been other follow-up experiments from them and some critique of the experiment. But it wasn't necessarily that it was easy for the cage, if I understand the experiment correctly, it wasn't so much that it was easy for the rats that were in the cage to wean themselves up, because it did say that they showed physiological signs of going through detoxing. So I'm not sure if it was easy for them to wean off, but more than it was kind of like why they actually weaned themselves off is, I don't think is well understood, but that they did was more of that, really kind of brought up more of the questions about environment.
Okay, and also could you relate this research to human behavior?
Yeah. Well, I think that this study, I think that it's a very complex type of study, because when we think about ourselves in terms of, even if we are in an environment that looks like it's very nice and shiny or whatnot, I think still it's a little bit more complicated in terms of how we might react as human beings in terms of what our own experience it is, and some of our what is referred to as cultural trauma. So some of the things like holding on to beliefs about who you are as a people, no matter what environment you are in. It would be interesting to me to see how just the belief system of how what you're told that you are and how you internalize that would be interesting to me to see if those types of outcomes, if they were human instead of rats. So I think it's a very complex type of situation or way to answer.
Thank you so much.
Question?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'd like to ask if you feel as though referring to the Charlottesville situation, and this covers everything, and I also see how it relates to the United States Public Health Service syphilis study, and that is treating one human being with the same respect and dignity that they deserve and that you deserve. So it's treating one human the same as you would you expect to do for yourself. And Dr. Warren mentioned just being, and I think that being is good, yes, but being and appreciating another person's being. So I'm hoping that the realization when we see all races coming together in Charlottesville, and even now with the young people talking of coming together about gun control, is that people are beginning to realize and to show the importance of human life and human dignity, and you treat everyone with that respect.
Thank you.
Would you like?
My name is Joyce Christian, and I'm a nurse. I have a question, I guess maybe the both of you can answer. Piggybacking on the rat pack, or the rat park. Yeah. We have seen in middle-class neighborhoods where drugs have invaded into their territory. They have good surroundings, good peers, and you also have the other side of the coin where drugs are in neighborhoods that are depressed, indigenous people. Some, like the Native Americans, have been imposed certain sicknesses, diseases on them by being confined in a reservation where this behavior has been allowed to fester because there's high degree of diabetes, alcoholism, even venereal diseases are going on in those places, hepatitis and so forth. So, with your concept of environment, I'm having a hard time understanding how someone in an environment that is good, we say it's good, and someone in an environment that's been placed on them, like different things, slavery, reservation, and depressed neighborhoods. How does this fit into what you're trying to say today? Maybe I'm not hearing it because I have a hard time kind of figuring out these people are in good neighborhoods. Why is it happening in their neighborhoods with drugs and so forth? And so, you know, I guess the environment, is it totally the environment or, you know?
Yeah, I think that the experiment, I think is very limited, obviously, but yes, but what we can observe just all around us is exactly what you did, that drugs, addiction to drugs is an epidemic in this country, and we see it at all levels and with all socioeconomic classes. So I wonder about this a lot as well, because I know on my Indian reservation, it's a huge, drug addiction is a huge problem. But I also have seen it in middle class as well. And so that's kind of what got me wondering about how we look at things and how we interpret things, and what are we internalizing as human beings. What is what Dr. Warren referred to a few times already, so what is our framework that we are working within ourselves. And so I wonder how much of that plays a part into addiction, not just having the genetics that predisposes us to addiction, but these other complex type of not very easy, not tangible other types of issues. And if you think, for me, I think about some of the experiments that have been done, like the Stanford prison experiment as well. Again, where you had these college students, since they were at Stanford, I'm assuming they were probably middle class and whatnot, but how their thought and how they act, their actions and behaviors changed based on them role-playing, and then even knowing that they were engaging in an experiment and given a character, to play, and how serious they got, and how those and the trauma that resulted from the experiment itself. So there is opportunity. There is much more, something deeper, psychological, perhaps, going on, I would think, in the nation.
For me, I think the environment plays a tremendous role in how you act, what you do, beyond your even knowing. I don't know of that experiment she was speaking of, but I know when I was in school back in the day, it was an experiment where they put a group of rats in a crowded area, kept them in a crowded area, another group in an area that was free to run and free to do whatever they want, and the rats began to fight each other that were in the crowded area. So the impact of the environment is yet to be appropriately measured. My bias is that the environment has a stronger role in how we interact with each other than people previously thought.
Just one second. I actually have two questions, one for clarification and my question. Dr. DeJong, you referred to the reservations as Indian reservation.
Can't hear you, right?
You referred to the reservation as an Indian reservation. And to help us out, what's the preferable descriptive term, Indian or Native American?
Okay, very, very good question. Neither. No, I'm just kidding. So the Native American is probably less used than American Indian, but either one, they're pretty interchangeable. But from my understanding is that because when you say Native American, the argument is, well, I was born here in America, so I'm Native American as well. So American Indian is usually what you'll see mostly in the literature.
Okay, that's helpful. So that's my question. This question, one of the things we just did was publish the clinical trials that Dr. Warren led in doing with interviews with various leaders across the country to see to what extent blacks should participate or not participate in clinical trials. One of the things that was quite obvious is the notion of trust and trustworthiness.
We can't hear you.
I sound very well. But the lack of trust that blacks may have because of the lack of trustworthiness that those persons have gained because they were not trustworthy. So my question is about a specific experience I've had. In South Florida, we have these large casinos, hard rock casinos and so on Seminole Reservation land. And in those communities, those casinos make a lot of money. So the money goes to the tribes and those tribes. So healthcare in terms of access financially is not an issue. But doctors go on routinely and open themselves up, and the Harbor Cafe and all the casinos give them the space to do so. But still, you have this lack of trust or whatever, even amongst their own doctors on the reservation. Can you say something to what else can be done when the community itself is not supporting the well-being of the community, even though there are extremely high rates of diabetes, hypertension, and other things in those communities? This was to Dr. DeJong.
Well, yeah, I think that's a really good question, because we had someone earlier talk about community-based research, and I think a lot of this goes back to the research, the trust relationships, at least from my understanding for American Indian tribes, is that supposedly they weren't treated as community-based partners in the past, and so what happened was they were kind of used for research and for gain of the person coming into research. And so there wasn't a give and take, it wasn't a symbiotic relationship, and a lot of times tribes would even suffer from the researchers coming in. And so there is, from my understanding, there is still going to be, I still see it a lot with tribes that they're not, it's not that they're not friendly or welcoming. I think that you'll find most American Indians to be very, very friendly and welcoming, but they're very skeptical still. And I think the only thing that's going to need to happen is just over time earning back that trust, and it will probably take a long time. And the casino issue is it's another whole other issue within the American Indian community. And so there are just really a handful of tribes that benefit from the casino types of monies that come in, and those are tribes that actually are in geographical areas where that they can take advantage of that. And it is a huge money maker, thank goodness, for the tribes. But that's a whole other issue in and of itself. The tribe that I come from is geographically isolated. You know? The only way you're going to go there is if you got lost or you're hunting Bigfoot. So, no, we don't. Our tribe is an extreme poverty, and we do have a lot of skepticism. And even when somebody comes and says they want to do good and they want to help the tribe, it's still really, it's met with skepticism and it's met with at arm's length. So I think it's just going to take some time.
Yes. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. My name is Latifa Mohammed. I am an attorney by profession, and I practice primarily here in Tuskegee, and throughout the state of Alabama, and in some other states as well. Dr. Rueben, well, this is for you, and you can respond too, Dr. Risling, because I think it's a broad question, but it has to do with the Tuskegee study. Why do you think, or what have you come to know about why the syphilis study has not been talked about in this community where it was held? And a follow-up question for that is, do you think that the history of the non-talk has impacted African Americans today? And lastly, how do you think we can cure this lack of communication in the African American community? And it probably would resonate as well in the American Indian community, because I'm aware that there are some issues regarding the high statistics of alcoholism among Indians, among American Indians. And yet, it's like it's only talked about in certain circles and not on a broad basis. So I think the issue is lack of communication and how impactful that lack has been on our communities.
Really good question, but I'm convinced that the conversation is ongoing, and it's being nurtured. There's a whole different conversation about the U.S. Public Health Service syphilis study. I think what is left to be more publicly heard is around the notion of the truth. And I don't think people want to engage in something that's not true. And whenever, at least in my interaction, when you have conversations about things that are not true, then the conversation is shut down from folks who know the truth. So I think it's not the message, it's the messengers that need to change. And I think the work for the Senate family members are engaged in the voice of our fathers, for our fathers, is really a robust conversation that is coming home. That's why we're here every year, but it's coming home. I think the truth is yet to be fully disclosed. For example, one of the family members said they believe that something is still going on. Yet all that you read is that nothing's going on. And my response, both personally and professionally, is that I don't know. And the I don't know, I think, opens up a level of authenticity and truthfulness. It says, well, let's find out. But it's illogical to say that we're absolutely sure that nothing's going on, or we're absolutely positive that some of the men were not injected when the same group went to Guatemala and did inject. So I think that until the honesty is forthcoming, the conversation will be going on, it won't be public. So I don't know, it's a legitimate response to a lot of what people think. And that's why I don't think the conversation is as robust as it should be. And again, it's growing. Last year, the Voices for Our Fathers had a community healing, not on campus, outside the campus. This year, there was a scholarship banquet, not on campus, but in community. And we've yet to admit that there's still some tension between the university and the community. Even as something as basic as the Tuskegee History Museum. Now, we have a wonderful legacy museum here, but there's a Tuskegee History Museum, and it's really not clear to some what President Clinton was talking about when he said he wants to establish a museum in Tuskegee. So we're not having that conversation because it's a sensitive one. But we have two museums that are wonderful. They just were created for different purposes. Does that answer your question?
It helps. Thank you.
Well, I would like to know who we blame for all of this carrying on now, because after the rats feed them the drugs, after what they're doing to the schools and everything, and trying to keep a lot of the young blacks locked up in jail and stuff like that. Who do we blame? Do we blame ourselves, or do we blame the politicians? And then I started thinking, I said, well, we put the politicians in office, so don't we feel like we helping them do the things that they want to do for the people of the country? Or do we do something about it? And I felt with the young generation from Florida, when they were shooting in the schools and they didn't do anything about the gun laws, some of the kids, they marched and they said one thing, that we want to make a difference if we have to run for a lot of those positions, because it doesn't make sense. Sometimes I think that some of the politicians, we need to get out anyway, because I think they're too set in their old ways, and they just sit back and let things happen. And another thing is greed. Greed is what's killing this country. Because when Trump gave the tax break, everybody voted on Trump because Trump will save us money. But he's not knowing what he's doing to destroy the country. So I would like to know, who do we really vote?
I really don't think blame is the right phrase. Blame didn't work. Who's guilty is a different question. I think if we seriously engage in who's guilty of wrongdoing, then there ought to be consequences to the guilt. But blaming has not done very much good. So who's guilty is the question. Just like in the beginning when the apology was pursued, it became clear that the guilty party was the United States Public Health Service System. Public Health Service. So from guilt came consequence, and the consequence was some settlement for the family members and actually the development of this center. So I think we shift our conversation from blame to guilt and consequence. I think we'll have a very different result.
On that, you're blame, but say for example the law, if you're involved, you don't have to be guilty, but you can be involved and you still get blamed.
And that's an ethical dilemma, because I think the ethics precedes the law. So, you know, I'm complicated to talk about the law. I'd rather talk about the ethics. And all too often, we get blamed, we ain't guilty. So, you know, the issue of guilt is critical for me.
What can we do about that?
What we doing? I mean, this conversation is about shifting that guilt, shifting that problem to resolution. Like the young student who's a descendant family member. She's finishing her PhD next year. Hear that, y'all? Next year. She's finishing her PhD, and her research is around the same subject matter that folks suffer from right now. Some of the folks are descendant family members. So we have things we can do, and we're preparing people to do them. So there's a lot to be done and a lot we're doing.
My question also relates to issues of language.
Of language?
Language. And that, okay. My question relates to issues of language as you're talking about it now. When the sister said middle class, black communities versus lower class, we don't see ourselves living on reservations. So I want to know, what is the term that your people use for the area as opposed to the term that the oppressor has given you, and also the question of the notion of tribe. Is that, is the language one which sets up a system that you all are different and which keeps us as formerly enslaved people who are also living in redlined areas? I guess you could call us on the reservation, but we think we're not. So I wonder, how can we see how you self-describe yourself and how your people do that? Also, Dr. Warren, how do we have the language, and I don't like binary systems, but how can we agree possibly on the similarity of the problems we have, which will not make one group think we better off than the other, and not think that finances is the only issue at hand, which doesn't really deal with the question of white supremacy, patriarchy, and the like.
Yeah, thank you for bringing this up, because actually this is huge, what you brought up, language. Well, number one, the English language is not our language. It is a language that was also imposed on the American Indians, and a lot of American Indian tribes are losing their language. It's becoming lost. So so I think first to think about the fact that it's not our language that is being used, and then the term reservation. And it's important to think about how we so nonchalantly on our reservations use that term, because we refer to where we live as the res, R-E-C, the res. I'm from res, the res. As a matter of fact, this is really, I think, an unhealthy way to look at. We have a huge identity crisis in the American Indian community, very, very huge. And that I also believe has a lot to do with the rates of depression and suicide, and addiction, and the lack of well-being and whatnot. That we have something that within the community is called res cred. So res cred means that you're not simply card carrying. So all of these are all governmental, these are all terms that are not ours, but we've adopted somehow, and I don't think they're doing us any service at all. But card carrying means that you have a card saying that you are from a federally recognized tribe and part of an Indian tribe. Res cred is goes beyond having the card, saying that you actually have you have the lived experience of what it's like to be on your reservation. So you're a so-called real Indian, culturally embedded. And it's kind of a shame because there is this huge conflict that we have in terms of when you leave your reservation, because remember, a lot of these reservations are put into areas that are not geographically conducive to making the living, no matter who lives there on these lands. So then if you go off your land, off your reservation to go to get a better life for yourself, to get education or whatnot, then are you turning your back on your people? You know, and then how do you make that sit well with you as somebody who's not on the reservation but is still very much culturally who identifies with their people? So I think it's a really great that you bring that up, because I think we need to reflect on that, and I think we need to really bring that out and to look at it and ask ourselves, why are we using these terms? And you know, are they in service to us? I think not. The other thing you asked about how we refer to ourselves. So our tribe is called the Hupa Valley Tribe. It's not the name that we gave ourselves. Our actual name for us is something called Nitenawe. Nitenawe simply means the place where the trails return. So there's a huge disconnect with that language.
Just a few comments. When I was working in the government with CDC, it was a strong move afoot to not use the term American Indian. But when I'm in company of folks of that group, what am I to say? I just say what I've heard. But they don't use the term American Indian. The government uses that term. Native American has a different connotation. The other point that's critically important, there are over 500 so-called tribes, and what had me pause when I was working in government is it's a federally recognized tribe. And what does that mean? And there are benefits to federally recognized tribes. And when I would go around and I was working with Native Americans, I really didn't know or care about the federal recognition, because that means that somebody else has told you who you are. So, and then the money flows accordingly, and that happens in many oppressed communities. So the point that I think Dr. Hodge has repeatedly said, it's about language, and we need to figure out the language that we're comfortable with and move accordingly.
But for us, I'm asking you the same question.
I don't know how to answer. But this whole notion, in our language, we don't use the question of class. We use the question of income. That's measurable, because a lot of folk are living middle class and they in another class. So I think we've got to wrestle with our language, because sometimes if you have a certain class mentality that causes a certain behavior, has nothing to do with your objective income. So the language, as you're suggesting, is so important. I think this whole notion of community comes out of a common politic. And I'm from South Central Los Angeles. I'm from the black community, which talks about my common experience and my common politic, regardless of where I am geographically. And so often we think our community is where we are geographically located. So I think the whole notion of community, of who we call ourselves, is something that we've got to decide. That's the ethics of it. I think that's the responsibility as well. I hope I got some of you.
Good afternoon. My name is Leo Ware, and I am one of the descendants of the Tuskegee Sister Study. I had cousins, I had two grandfathers caught up in it. And what I wanted to say to the attorney here that asked about why the community, now we are the descendants, we are working on that. We are getting as many and finding as many members as we want, attorney. Attorney, I am trying to address your issue. Okay, we the descendants are trying and searching for members and bring them into the farm, and we have been successful. And I'm sitting here right now, and I'm looking at about 4 members that I contacted, and we got them in here. So we're working on that. And we'll also, when you heard about the safety study, it happened right here. But when you heard about it, it come from the outside. So a lot of times things happen in your backyard, and somebody else have to bring it to you and let you know it's happening. And I thought I'd just share that with you, okay?
I appreciate it. I have to run, because I'm about to be late for a meeting with the judge.
You know Connie Gay?
Connie Gay?
Yeah, in Atlanta.
Our final question is right here.
She'll be in touch with you. Yeah.
My question is for Dr. Warren. I think my question is about the future, predicting the future. So given the nowadays information that we have about 100 years back, and we're talking many factors affecting the well-being of our population, what would you see 20, 50 years from now, based on the nowadays deep knowledge that you have, back and then past, present, but I'm interested in the future. So what would you see 20 years from now about the well-being of our population?
20 years, I don't know about time, but in the future, I see a very positive environment, because I see a cadre of young people, particularly young black people, who understand and are pursuing the things that need to be done. So I'm not bothered by what's going to be tomorrow. I'm convinced that if we do what we're supposed to be doing today, tomorrow's going to be all right. Their lack of knowledge is not their fault, it's our fault. And so they are stepping up and stepping out. So I'm real comfortable with tomorrow. I really am. It's good.
That concludes this section. We're going to put it back to you, Dr. Warren, for your closing remarks.
Let me do this. I'm on the panel. Dr. Hodge, will you have some closing remarks? Thank you for our response.
We want to recognize. A few people said today, a few people here today were attorneys, and we have one of them right there. So she will be an attorney in the future, and the day is coming. And for our presenters, Dr. Warren, Dr. D.D.S. Now, as we say in the Baptist Church, we can't pay. We want to give you something as a token of appreciation from our heart. This coin was minted. I want to go right there. If you see it anywhere, there's somebody else shared where you were. Someone said in your sleep. And if they didn't, they stole it.
Y'all think young folk is chronological, but young folk really are who you're going to pass the baton to. Y'all hear me now? And when I ain't calling no names, but the center is in good hands tomorrow. I'm going to leave it at that, let y'all figure out.
I'm not calling any names.